Welcome back on the show. This is the news review where we assess the news stories and how it resonates with you and I. Joining us today is political scientist and director of Center for European Studies, Dr. Kyei-Mensah is my guest this morning. And this segment is brought to you by Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic. We are offering free prostate screening and free female fertility screening. Their location in Accra, they are on Spintex Road, opposite the Shell signboard, and in Kumasi, they are in Kronum, Abohia, behind the Angel Educational Complex. In Takrade, they are in Anaji Estate, and in Tema, Community 22, in Techiman, Hansua, and in Siama, in Zima. You can call them on 0244-867068 or 0274-234-321. Endpoint Homeopathic Clinic, the end to chronic diseases. Every time Benjamin reads that or says that, I think it becomes a part of him. Anyway, welcome to the show, and good morning, Dr. Asah-Asante.
Good morning.
It's a pleasure to have this conversation with you this morning.
Yes, good morning once again.
Right. So before we get into the newspapers and the stories that are making the headlines, I'm sure you listened to the president yesterday. And just a few minutes, tell me what's the most topical thing that has been in your awareness this morning to begin the conversation.
Unfortunately, I couldn't listen because I had to teach. But I pick a few that he said, which I will touch on. And as the conversation goes on, we'll be able to add where necessary. I listened to a portion where he talked about coups that are happening in West Africa. It's unfortunate that we are having such development in West Africa, especially against the backdrop that we, the people of Africa, have fought very hard to bring democracy to where it is. And today, some few disgruntled people who have no concern, have no interest about the state they find themselves, who want to shortchange that process and have a system that you and I do not believe in. I was happy that the president touched on that and that we should support the mother organization, ECOWAS, to do everything within its power to get out some of these adventurists from our political system. It was a good thing the president said, and I commend him for that. And we should not just make the talk, but we should walk the talk by making sure that anybody who crosses that line, I'm talking about states, who go against the will of the people to establish such a government, we all fight and kick that one from our system. He also talked about the issue of some of his achievement, particularly the free senior high school education system. A brilliant one. He mentioned the fact that the record that they came out with this year in terms of the school performance, the schools and their performances in the WASI results, very commending and all that. He said that for a decade, this has been the best performance. It is true. But when you look at the statistics, time will not permit us to go through. Even though they scored about 70%, you look at this, the real figures in terms of how many people sat the exam, how many were absent, and each subject, those who wrote the exam, there are a lot of worrying signs. If you take, for instance, English language, people who were able to make it, all right, those who fail, all right, WAEC tells us that about 448,674 people took the exam, the whole WASI exam, and 3,404 were absent. If you do the mathematics, you get about 45,270. And then you put this figure on those who sat and passed from A1 to A6. You are talking about English language. When you do the mathematics, you deduct, you have 119,990. If you write exam, and at the end of the day, one paper, 119,990 cannot move. Remember, the subject that we are talking about are core subjects: English, mathematics, integrated science, social studies, and the rest of them. If you fail in one, you cannot find yourself in any job. If you fail in one, you cannot progress to any school. It tells you that if you have a figure like this, 119,990, that is for English language, they cannot make any progress. They have to go back and reset. Then it's a sign which is should be of worry to us. Look at mathematics. You have 168,998 people you wrote to one exam, and 168,998 cannot make progress. It should worry us. If you do integrated science, it's about 148,804. And if you do the social studies, 104,403. All these things are figures that are frightening. I agree and I concede the fact that government has done a lot to bring us to where we are. If you look at the results, yes, in percentage terms, very good. But in real nominal terms, these are figures who cannot progress to any level of academic endeavor or find any meaningful job. It tells us that all is not well. We need to strengthen our effort to make sure that we get the best. It's not good enough to write exam and one paper. You have so many people failing. So we need to do a lot. And if you even put this story side by side with Africa Education Watch report, which says that if you look at the funding the government has provided, and then you balance it, that of what parents, how much they pay, the figures are clear that parents are paying more than government. So can we still say that it's free? Is it free that parents are paying, or it is free that government is paying? This is $1 million question we need to ponder over and find lasting solution. There are a number of them, but this program is meant to look at other stories. One day we'll come back and look at all the full text of his speech and make a detailed discussion on it. But this is just for the starters.
Right. But of course, indeed, the free SHS has its advantages and disadvantages. The Africa Edu Watch, like you mentioned, is saying that over 2.5 million Ghanaian students have benefited from this policy. So the policy itself is not bad. It's just the mechanism for the mode of implementation is where the challenges lie in how effective it will be for students, and also alleviates the challenges that parents are going through, especially because we know that they're spending more money on education as compared to when it wasn't even free. But let's get into the newspapers this morning. I'll start with the Daily Graphic. On the front page, it says, State of the Nation's Address, face tomorrow with confidence. That's what the president is saying. The story about we have stumbled, but we are rising again, and we've bruised, but we are healing. That's from the president. The minority leader is also saying that high unemployment rate was missing in the president's speech. That story is on page 13. I'll do a few headlines before we get into the actual story. And on page 10, it says, a no-flight airport for Ho. This is an opinion on the Ho airport and how that is faring. High unemployment rate missing, according to minority leader. That is the story here on page 13. And then SONA reflects country's conditions. That is according to some experts, Dr. John Osei-Kwapong, who's executive director of Democracy Project. And technology will facilitate early diagnosis of sickle cell diseases. That is a study here in the Daily Graphic newspaper. And I will establish free port enclave in Tema. That is according to Alan Chomanteng on his campaign activities. So let's start with this story on President Akufo-Addo's saying that Ghanaians should rally behind the government because we've stumbled, yet we are rising again. It says President Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo yesterday rallied the nation to show resilience in the face of global challenges, urging the citizenry to face tomorrow with confidence in his penultimate State of the Nation's address. Quote, we stumbled, but we are rising again. We were bruised, but we are healing. We have recovered our footing. We have dusted ourselves off. And now we face tomorrow with confidence, he said. Dr. Kyei-Mensah, how would you respond to this this quote from the president, from his speech, saying that,
Yes, there's nothing but an apt description of what has happened. Yes, we had some challenges and we are trying to work it out. That is a fact. But what we need to know is that government must continue to learn from these mistakes. We don't want a situation where, yes, now we have the hand of the IMF in the economy, helping us to maintain some sanity. When we are okay, there is no point of we going back. But sometimes you listen to government that we have had. When they are in difficulty, you will see this type of language. But when the period is over, then they go back to state of nature, where it's nothing but chaotic situation and all that. This should be a learning curve for us, so that never again would we want to go to IMF, but that we can make use of the resources we have here and then develop them to the best of our abilities and use for our lives.
Right. So now let's go to Dr. Kasela-Atofo-Sen, who is saying that it's a big mistake, or, the president shot himself in the leg by leaving out the dire situation of unemployment in the nation. We've had series of features and stories about how young people who graduated, and Benjamin calls it underemployment, who graduated are unable to find jobs and are, doing all kinds of things like checking blood pressure, just to make ends meet. So something as significant as this to be left out of the nation's State of the Nation's address. Would you agree with Dr. Kasela-Atofo-Sen that this is a big blunder committed by the president?
It is. The minority leader has hit the nail right on the head. This can never be just an accident. It is, a big one, and that need to be talked about. Because if you look at the large army of youth who have graduated from various universities and other institutions and have no job, it is a cause for concern. And you can see the effect of this when you listen to the National Security Minister saying that this is a threat. And absolutely, there's no doubt that this is a threat. You have people who are ready for jobs and they have nothing to work on. One, we are not making effective use of resources. In political science, we have something we call state capacity. And one of its areas is that you should be the administrative capacity where you make use of human and material resources to govern effectively and efficiently so as to render effective accounts for the public. That is, I'm not surprised that the president could not render accounts to us. It tells you how weak the capacity of the state relative to what we are talking about. Have we made effective use of the human resource we train? People go to various universities and they pay little fees and here and there. But you realize that government put in a lot in terms of addition of what fees to develop them. They finish school and some of them are moving out in droves to seek greener pastures. Those who are here, they jump into the street selling dog chains and all that. Some are in the market taking statistics, vitals of people with health conditions and all that. I'm not saying that these things are not good, but we are saying that that is not the intention of the state, training people and throwing them into the street. Then it means that there is something wrong with our thinking and our policy. And something like this should be very important in the SONA, and that if it's missing, minority leaders support him in saying that. My dear sister, if you just apprise yourself with information even about what unemployment statistics in some African countries, you realize that, look, there's something we need to do and do now. Check figures about Chad, check figures about Ivory Coast, and check figures about Mali. You realize that in all these countries, Ghana is faring behind them. And for me, what is more instructive than Chad, all right? They have better figures than what we have. So what are we doing here? It's a joke. Our leaders must get serious, sit down and plan the economy very well and stop the talk shop. We need the workshop. They should walk the talk. For me, that is key. So I support the minority leader 100% because such an occasion, we want an overview of what the government has done so far. And then governments must be bold to admit that this place were wrong and that There's nothing wrong about that. And that when given opportunity, we will right the wrongs. That is all. Governance is guided by what? Honest admission of wrongdoing. It is not always about what praises. You don't just take credit, you take blame as well, and must be bold to face the reality. Otherwise, in no time, it will dawn on you.
Right. Just to touch on something you mentioned about how Ghanaians are leaving the country in droves. Yesterday, I went by the Abelempe, the Canadian embassy there, and hundreds of Ghanaians queuing up just to get out of the country. And you speak to them off the record, and they tell you that they've lost hope in this country. Most of them are graduates. They've graduated 5-10 years ago. Whatever jobs that they've been able to find for themselves, in a few years, they're overburdened with taxes and underperformance because of various issues. And so, yes, it was a big mistake that the president couldn't touch on that. Let's get into the Ghanaian Times newspaper. And on the front page, of course, the SONA is featured here. It says, "Don't take our territorial integrity for granted," according to President Akufo-Addo. And let's quickly do that story on page 9. So the president and Akufo-Addo says the country can no longer take its territorial integrity for granted, as attacks from extremist groups operating in the sub-region proves more imminent now than ever. You touched briefly on that before you even started. Now, according to him, the current peace being enjoyed in the country was not by happenstance, but a deliberate policy and planning on the part of government, coupled with a lot of hard work and dedication on the part of security services. So West African sub-region was under the threat of terrorism and violent extremism and rapidly spreading south of the Sahel. He's glad to be able to report that the entire territory that makes up our nation is safe, secure, and under control of government and the people of Ghana. Also, again, the issue of security. All these young people who do not have jobs, they say the devil finds work for the idle hands. It will be easy for someone to convince them to pick up arms and, fight, coups, anything, some sort of military action that will be to the detriment of the democracy and peace that we are enjoying in this country. But what's your opinion on that?
Yes, I think here I support the president for what he said. We all should not be spectators. We must join the fight to maintain our country and maintain the stability. I commend him for all that they have put in terms of resources to bring us to where we are. But I know that it is part of the social contract that I've given my power to you as a government, protect my life and property, and I obey. So when they do that, they must know that it's part of the social contract responsibility they are on it. But that aside, you want to also commend the security in terms.
All right, I think Dr. Asah-Asante's network is challenging, but he was just reacting to the president's view that we should not take our territorial integrity for granted in the newspaper, as I read that out. But it's interesting to note that in yesterday, of course, the president is still, the first chair of the ECOWAS community, and so he has a responsibility to address these issues. Is Dr. Asah-Asante back? Okay, so let's get into, I will not do these anymore. Let's get into the publisher and see what's happening there. On the front page, it says, "I take both blame and credit of government," says Akufo-Addo. And the 13th African Games Committee replies Ablakwa. Let me do that story on page 3 now. So the local organizing committee of the 13th African Games says they will continue to be transparent in its financial dealings. Member North Tongu MP Samuel Okujeto Ablakwa has raised concerns on social media about $48 million operational for the African Games, which is expected to kick off from March 8, 2024. But the LOC, in response signed by its executive chairman, Dr. Akufo-Addo, stated that some statements made by Mr. Ablakwa are misrepresentations of the fact. Now, the full statement says, quote, "Hosting pan-continental competitions, such as the iconic African Games, comes with significant investment, but also with enduring country-impacting benefits. So it is within this context that the local organizing committee of the 13th African Games notes the release issued by the Honorable Member of Parliament, North Tongu constituency, Samuel Kyei-Mensah, and clarifies as follows. So first, what the MP put out is a misrepresentation of the fact of the LOC was inaugurated by His Excellency Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo almost 4 years ago. And the operational budget of the LOC cannot be limited to 18-day period of the games. So what Samuel Kyei-Mensah is saying is a misrepresentation. That is according to the local organizing committee. They go on to say that the impression created by Honorable Ablakwa that the sum of $48 million will be spent within the period spanning 8th to 23rd March is an erroneous and disingenuous ploy to divert the attention of Ghanaians from the excellent work done by the government of Ghana and the LOC to organize and host the 13th African Games. Let me do a couple of other headlines, then we have just a few minutes to wrap this up. Message on the State of the Nation's address, Nana Akufo-Addo. Of course, the SONA will feature in most of the newspapers, the headlines, because that is the biggest story now. It's the last time the president will be addressing the nation in that capacity. And so a lot of stakeholders are interested to see what he has said. I think we have the full speech here in the publisher. Let's move on now to do the Finder, last paper for the day. It says, I take both blame and credit for my government's performance. That is according to President Akufo-Addo. I saw some reactions on social media about how the president didn't, for once, he didn't mention COVID-19 and Russia-Ukraine war as the reason Ghana is facing such harsh economic weather. So perhaps, indeed, he has taken the blame for some of the things that he could have done better, or his government could have done better. But to wrap this up, it says government targets universal access to electricity this year. And then on the Canadian murder, 7-member jury constituted to quick start trial. That is the story about the young man who traveled to Canada for greener pastures but was shot and killed. Up next, we get into sports. Muftau Nabila Abdullahi is up next, bringing you the latest in the world of sports. Stick with us.